I had started to suspect when her hugs gradually became looser, her eyes no longer following me when I entered the room. Small, trivial changes, but they added up and made my heart feel like it had thorns. Texts replied later than usual. Her phone always faced down on the table, and every time I asked casually, she would smile, that awkward smile not reaching her eyes. At the time, I was 37, living with my wife and son in a suburb north of Dallas. She, Jenna, was my age, a high school English teacher at a local school. I used to love the way she read poetry in the sunlit kitchen, thinking I was lucky to have a wife like her. But then coldness seeped into our life together, like the winter mist, soft but deep. I checked her phone, nothing. Laptop, clean. Social media accounts, innocuous to the point of suspicion. I began to feel like a madman spying on the person who once vowed to be by my side forever. But my instincts weren't wrong. I bought 3 small cameras, the type that could easily be hidden and connect directly to my personal server. I didn't tell anyone, didn't write anything down, just a silent plan between myself and myself. I set the cameras in the living room, bedroom, and one in the hallway facing the front door. That weekend, I told Jenna I was going to Austin to visit an old friend. She nodded quickly, unusually, and wished me a nice rest. On the way, I didn't play any music. I didn't call anyone. I only thought of one thing. Was I ready to face the truth? On the second night I opened my laptop, the videos began playing one by one. At first, it was my son sitting watching cartoons, Jenna walking around the house with a cup of coffee. So ordinary, it almost made me give up. But then, at 1:13 a.m. on Sunday, the footage of the bedroom showed a familiar face. Mark, Jenna's co-worker. I had shaken his hand at a year-end party, complimented him on being sharp, polite. And Jenna? She smiled, pushed him onto the bed, and then... things I'll never forget. I don't remember how many things I broke. The laptop screen was pushed off the table, crashing to the floor. My hand bled from punching the door. In my head was only one sound, my heart racing, mixed with the images of the two of them tangled on our wedding bed. I lost control. I roared like a wild animal. If Jenna had walked in at that moment, my life might have ended in jail for the worst charges. I had to get out of there, immediately, before I lost myself completely. I wiped the blood from my hand, quickly packed a few items into an old backpack. My work laptop, my only tool to make a living, was the only thing I took aside from clothes. Before leaving the apartment, I sent the video to Mark's wife. The message had just 4 words. Your husband is cheating. As I walked out to the parking lot, I saw my son Liam playing near the porch. I walked over, hugged him tight, inhaling his familiar scent that choked me. I'll be gone for a while, I said, my voice rough, but I'll always love you, always. I shouldn't have said more, but I broke the rule. Your mom, she cheated on me. Liam stared at me, his eyes wide. I saw panic in his gaze. I wanted to swallow my words, but it was too late. I walked away, carrying an unnamed pain. That night, I drove aimlessly for 5 hours. My mind empty, my heart squeezed by an invisible hand. I didn't know where I was going, but I was sure of one thing. I would never be the man I was before. I drove through the night with no clear destination. The clock read past 3 a.m. when I paused at a lonely rest stop outside Tyler, Texas. I sat still in the car, the window fogged up, my heart as empty as the sky above. I didn't know what to do with the pain gnawing at every vein, every breath. The next morning, I rented a small Airbnb in an old residential area in Longview, a place where no one knew who I was, and I didn't need to pretend I was fine. The house had only 1 bedroom, the walls painted in faded white, the musty smell lingering in the air, like something forgotten long ago. I lived there like a ghost. I didn't turn on the lights unless necessary. My meals were mostly dry cereal and cold coffee. I avoided mirrors. Every time I saw myself in them, I only saw a man I no longer recognized. Thinner, unshaven, eyes like ashes. I didn't talk to anyone except Liam. Every evening, I'd call him via FaceTime. He tried to act strong, telling me about school, bragging about his math test, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Liam was only 10. At that age, a child shouldn't have to learn how to endure the silence between two adults. I hadn't responded to any of Jenna's messages, more than 60 missed calls, a dozen texts a day. I didn't open any of them. Her family called too, leaving voicemails with a mix of anger and pleading. I didn't reply. I was afraid. Afraid that just one word would pull me back into that hellish cycle. The one time I almost pressed the call button was when Jenna's voice came through the voicemail. "Luke, please, just let me know you're alive." I immediately turned off the phone, threw it on the bed, and collapsed to the floor. I felt my heart being stretched between the endless anger and the old memories that wouldn't die. There were days I lay on the couch for 12 hours, not moving. My head felt like it was filled with smoke. I didn't dream, but waking up still felt like I'd been running from an invisible chase. I used to be a simulation engineer, working from home on mechanical modeling projects for a defense company in Fort Worth. Now, my laptop was only open to stay connected to the company, taking on small contracts to maintain minimal expenses. I still hadn't told my boss why I was on extended leave. I was afraid that if I had to explain, I would have to relive every single moment of that betrayal. It wasn't just the end of my family, it had also severed my very sense of self. I started developing a strange habit, driving around town every night, no destination, no purpose. Once, I drove all the way to Shreveport, Louisiana, and turned back before the sun came up. In the dark, everything became simple, just me and the endless road ahead. I was afraid of myself, afraid that if I ever saw Jenna again, I wouldn't be able to control myself. There was no guarantee I wouldn't do something reckless. All the emotions inside me, anger, hurt, the longing to be understood, twisted together into a knot I couldn't untangle. I remember sitting in a cold bath for hours just to feel something different, other than the sadness. Not to torture myself, but to remind myself that I was still alive. 3 weeks passed like a sad dream with no resolution. I didn't know whether time was my ally or my enemy. On a rainy evening, Liam called me earlier than usual. His voice trembled. "Dad, Mom hasn't come out of her room all day. Dad, the house smells really weird." I sat up straight. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. "What have you eaten?" "Just some dry bread. I went to a friend's house yesterday and their mom gave me a sandwich." I didn't ask anything more. I simply said, "Stay there, I'm coming home." The drive back to Houston that day was one of the longest stretches of my life. I prayed Jenna would be okay, but I also feared what I would find would be more than I could bear. I didn't expect what awaited me behind that door. It was worse than anything I had imagined. The apartment reeked the moment I opened the door. Trash scattered across the floor, rotten food in the kitchen, and a disgusting smell that made me hold my breath. Liam was curled up on the sofa, clutching a small backpack. He rushed into my arms like a drowning man clinging to the last piece of wood. "Mom won't talk to me anymore," Liam whispered, his eyes red. I don't know what to do. I told him to stay in his room, handed him the still warm burger, and walked straight to the bedroom. Jenna sat motionless in front of the TV, watching an old news program. Her eyes were vacant, her hair matted, her cheeks sunken to the point where I couldn't recognize the woman who had once been my wife. I couldn't say anything. Part of me wanted to scream, another part just wanted to rush her to the hospital immediately. My emotions were a tangled mess, love, fear, disgust, heartbreak, all mixed together, choking my chest. After Jenna was taken to the emergency room, the doctor informed me that she was severely depleted both physically and mentally, showing signs of severe depression. I was advised not to visit her in the early stages to avoid triggering further agitation. I returned, cleaned up the house, scrubbed every stain, replaced every dim light bulb, not for Jenna, but so Liam could breathe in a place called home. But every time I sat down, the anger inside me would rise like a tidal wave. It wasn't like ordinary irritation. It was something darker, smoldering, sometimes almost overwhelming my reason. I knew if I didn't find a way to release it, it would destroy me. By chance, I found an old flyer stuck between two books on the shelf. Raymond's Martial Arts Center. Free trial sign-up. I chuckled bitterly. I was 37, never fought outside of a few scuffles in high school, and now I was planning to learn how to box? But then I put on some sportswear, laced up my shoes, and went. I needed to do something. Anything. Raymond's wasn't the polished gym I expected. The cement floor had dried bloodstains, and the walls were plastered with torn old posters. But the people there surprised me. Quiet, disciplined, no one showing off. A guy named Cal, who looked like a retired Marine, was the first to speak. Hearing my reason for coming, he just nodded and handed me a pair of gloves. "Don't talk, just train," Cal said softly. My first session lasted nearly 2 hours. I was breathing like a horse pulling a cart, sweat pouring like rain. When I punched the heavy bag, I thought of Mark, of Jenna, of the moment that video played before my eyes. My punches got harder, then another. By the time my knees felt like they might give out, I realized I had just spent an hour not thinking about any of it. Cal let me spar with him, but it was clear he was just letting me vent my anger. Every time I missed a punch, he tapped me lightly on the shoulder or ribs, as if reminding me, anger won't make you stronger, it only makes you lose control. I started going back to the center every evening after work. My body ached, bruised, but my mind became clearer. Little by little, I learned how to control my breathing, how to calm myself before reacting. Liam started asking me more about where I was going. I explained simply to him, "Dad is learning how to control his emotions." He nodded, then suddenly asked, "Dad, are you still angry at Mom?" I looked into his eyes. "I'm doing my best not to let my emotions hurt both of us." Liam nodded again, then wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Dad, please don't leave anymore." I gently squeezed his hand. "I'll never leave you again." I don't know what the future holds, but I know that, at least in that moment, I was pulling myself out of the abyss, thanks to the small hand tightly holding mine. Every punch, every dodge, was a way for me to hold on to the remnants of the man I used to be, the one who believed in family, love, and loyalty. I haven't forgiven, I haven't forgotten, but at least I'm learning how to survive. I can't forget the first image when I walked into the house that day. The stench from the hallway warned me of a scene that even my darkest imagination couldn't have pictured. The wooden floor was covered in crumpled food remnants, dark liquid stains stretching from the corner of the kitchen to the middle of the floor. Trash piled up, flies buzzing. The air was thick, rancid, like something was slowly decomposing in the dark. Liam was curled up by the window, holding a pillow, his eyes vacant of innocence. I held him tightly, feeling his stiffened shoulders, like he was trying to endure, thinking I wouldn't come back. I promised him once more, in the most solemn voice I could muster, "Dad's here now." When I entered the bedroom, I saw Jenna sitting on the bed, her eyes fixed blankly on the wall, illuminated by the TV screen. She didn't react when I walked in, nor did she turn her head. Her body was so emaciated it made me shiver. Her nightgown was stained, her hair tangled like straw, and her arms hung limply at her sides. A plastic bucket was placed at her feet, filled with an unidentifiable liquid. I called her name, no response. I approached and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. Jenna startled, then laughed nervously, her eyes still vacant. The laugh had no trace of awareness, as if I were some apparition that had appeared from her distorted memory. I felt a chill run down my spine. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and called 911. While waiting for the ambulance, I packed some clothes for Liam, gathered the necessary paperwork, and stood there looking at the house that used to be our home, now feeling like an abandoned cellar. At the hospital, the nurses quickly admitted Jenna. A psychiatrist came to speak with me after a few hours of waiting. He said that Jenna was in a serious state of disarray, showing signs of acute mental exhaustion, losing touch with reality. "You shouldn't visit in the early stages," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She could become violent or harm herself if confronted by someone tied to her current mental crisis." I nodded, without arguing. I felt like I was no longer in control of anything. I rented a small apartment near Liam's school, about a 30-minute drive from the hospital. Every morning I woke up early to make breakfast for my son, took him to school, then took the time to clean up paperwork and look into legal procedures to request temporary custody. The lawyer I hired was named Walter, a man from New Jersey, quick to speak and with no concept of sugarcoating things. "You've got a clear advantage," Walter said. "Jenna's mental state is not suitable for caring for a minor, but we need medical records and concrete evidence." I provided everything: photos of the house when I came back, a doctor's confirmation letter, and even a request for verification that my new living environment was suitable for a child. Even so, I didn't feel victorious. Every night, after reading a story to Liam, I would lie still in the dark, wondering, what am I protecting my son from? His mother? The memories? Or from me? One time, Liam asked, "Is Mom going to die, Dad?" I looked at him, trying to hold back the emotion rising in my throat. "No. Mom is sick, but she has a good doctor helping her. We'll do everything we can to make her better, okay?" He nodded. But inside him was the same wound that I carried. No words could erase the panic he had gone through, living alone with a woman he no longer recognized. I took Jenna to the hospital, not because I still loved her, not because of some marital obligation, but because I couldn't stand watching a person, even a betrayer, destroy themselves like that. But what hurt me the most was that I didn't know if I still had the ability to forgive, not for Jenna, but for myself, for letting my son live in hell for so long before finally returning. I watched Liam sleep, his face peaceful after days of turmoil. I silently promised, no matter what happens, whether Jenna recovers or not, I will never let him lose his way again. I will hold tightly to the one thing still intact in all this wreckage, the love of a father. After Jenna was admitted to the hospital, I went back to the old house with Walter to gather more evidence for the custody case. I wasn't planning to stay long, just to grab some paperwork and finish clearing out Liam's things. But what I found in the bedroom completely changed how I viewed the situation. A pile of sheets was neatly arranged on the bed, looking like the shape of a man lying on his side. My shirt, the hoodie I had worn on the camping trip with Jenna 2 years ago, and a faded baseball cap. Everything was arranged to the exact size of my body. There was even a sock tucked into the waistband, creating a makeshift shape as if she was trying to reconstruct me by any means. Walter stood still, unable to speak. I felt my skin go cold, my hands shaking uncontrollably. On the desk, dozens of scattered papers. I bent down and picked up each one. The words, "I'm sorry," were repeated over and over, covering the page as though she was obsessed with those 2 words. Some pages were written in green ink, others in red, some smudged with water. Some sentences started normally, then gradually became slanted, stretching into tangled, wavering lines like dry vines crawling around her consciousness. One part of me wanted to quickly fold it all up and throw it straight into the trash, but another part stood frozen for minutes, staring at that figure like I was looking at a distorted legacy of a love that had died. I had been so angry at Jenna before that I thought if she showed up in front of me at that time, I would destroy everything. But standing before this warped image, I only felt pity. A normal person wouldn't do something like this. A sane person wouldn't curl up in old smelly clothes and write endless apologies. Jenna didn't just betray me, she betrayed herself. I recalled the video that day, the way she smiled at Mark, the way her body moved so deliberately. When I first watched it, I thought, she chose this. But now, I started to ask myself, was this really Jenna? Or just an empty shell controlled by a dying ego? That doesn't excuse the betrayal. Nothing could. But it made my anger dull, not as sharp as before. It became blunt, breaking into small, heavy pieces, scattered across my chest like stones pressing down. I gathered the papers, put them in a folder. When I touched the old hoodie, I almost cried. It was the hoodie Jenna had put on me during our trip to Colorado when the weather suddenly turned cold. She had tiptoed, wrapped her arms around my neck, and said, "If one day I hurt you, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." I hated that I still remembered things like that. On the way back, Walter glanced at me, his voice softer than usual. "Are you thinking of forgiving her?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, the cityscape passing by like an old film. It's not about whether I can forgive or not, I said in the end. It's that I'm not sure if the person who was once capable of forgiveness is still alive inside me. Walter didn't ask anything more. He understood. That night, I sat next to Liam as he slept, gently brushing his hair. I realized that the only thing keeping me grounded was the child breathing next to me. I didn't know how to face Jenna if she recovered. I didn't know if I could love again after everything I trusted had been shattered. I wouldn't let him grow up in chaos. I wouldn't let the darkness from this broken marriage swallow Liam's soul like it had mine. I placed my hand over my chest. Nothing beats like it did before. It's just a steady rhythm, drained of emotion. Maybe that's the only thing keeping me alive through this phase. A heart that's learned to beat without hope. I found a light blue envelope in the mailbox outside my new apartment. No return address, just the familiar handwriting hastily written, "Luke, if you still want to know the truth." I sat motionless for 15 minutes, the heavy envelope in my hands. When I finally opened it, what was inside wasn't just a letter. It was a long roll of paper. 32 pages, typed with some handwritten notes, some parts scratched out, some lines scrawled like they were written in a panic. Included was a hard drive and a small sheet of paper filled with passwords. I've spent the whole night reading it. Each paragraph was like a deep cut into the already torn trust. Jenna started with the same apologies I had heard dozens of times in messages, but this time it was different. Presented meticulously, coldly, like a confession with no defense lawyer. She began recounting the story that started 2 months ago when things really crossed the line. A literary book-sharing forum. A man with an intellectual appearance, writing sharp comments that made her feel seen. They began texting. At first it was literary exchanges, then moved on to life confessions, emotions, until one day they spoke of what-ifs. "I didn't mean to deceive you, Luke," Jenna wrote, "but I let myself be led, little by little. I felt special when someone distant told me I was interesting, beautiful, worthy of being listened to." She confessed she'd developed feelings for this man even though they had never met. But it didn't stop there. When he began to grow distant, she transferred that emptiness to someone real. Mark, a coworker from school, someone who had once had lunch with both of us. "Mark isn't love," Janet continued. "I don't love him, nor do I want to leave you. I just wanted to continue feeling attractive, important. I know that's selfish." The next part made me stop reading for a moment. "Sometimes I would watch you make breakfast, take Liam to school, and feel like I was just a side character in someone else's life. You do everything so well, Luke. I started to feel unnecessary in my own home. I didn't cheat because I lacked love, but because I lacked the feeling of being loved. I felt like I was reading the diary of a stranger with a face I once knew." Jenna didn't hide anything. The email passwords, social media accounts, even her personal notes stored on her phone were all provided. She said I could check anything if I still doubted. The hard drive contained chat logs with her online lover and her daily journal entries throughout that period. I didn't have the courage to open all of it. Every time I scrolled down, I felt like I was walking deeper into a land with no way back. At the end of the letter, Jenna wrote, "If you want a divorce, I'll sign anything. I won't disturb you. I won't make demands. I won't ask for anything from you or Liam. I only want one thing, to contribute to healing my wounds and my son's." I read that line 3 times. No request for custody, no plea to come back, only the wish to heal herself without obstructing my journey. The next morning, I brought the letter to Walter's office. He skimmed through a few pages before looking at me. "She's leaving all the doors open," Walter said. "Which one do you want to walk through?" I didn't answer. At home, I placed the hard drive in a drawer and locked it. I wasn't ready to face the whole truth yet. But one thing I couldn't deny: Jenna wasn't playing hide and seek anymore. She was bare, broken, unguarded. I glanced over at Liam, sitting on the floor diligently coloring a world map. He looked up, pointing at a red dot on Texas. "Dad, is this where our home is?" I nodded. But inside, another question echoed. If Jenna really wants to make things right, do I still have room inside me to let her do that? Perhaps, All I can do now is continue listening. But listening doesn't mean trusting. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And love, if it still exists, will have to learn how to be reborn from these ashes. I don't know why I kept opening that video. Maybe it was because I wanted to find a new detail, a more convincing reason to hate Jenna, or perhaps, on the contrary, to salvage some humanity left in the image of the woman who was once my partner. But it always ended the same. I sat motionless in front of the screen, my hand gripping the edge of the table until it turned white, my eyes fixed on the movements I had memorized down to the second. Not just once, I watched the scene of Jenna in Mark's arms at least 20 times, then punished myself by opening the security footage of myself, my hair messy, my eyes bloodshot, screaming in a blind rage like a madman. The house shattered. The wardrobe door flew off its hinges. Blood from my hand spread across the floor. I don't remember how much I lost control, but the camera remembers. After rewinding it several times, I noticed something strange. Jenna's eyes in that video didn't look like those of someone in love. They were empty, almost lifeless, as though she was playing a role she didn't even understand why she had to play. Those intimate movements lacked emotion, lacked connection. Everything felt mechanical, nothing more. I don't know if that made me feel less hurt or more tragic. I started researching impulsive affairs, how the brain could get caught up in pleasure and the feeling of being noticed. Not to justify Jenna, but to find a way to explain what led her to cross that line. I clearly remember the winter 3 years ago. Aunt Lauren, who was closest to Jenna, passed away from a stroke. Jenna collapsed at the funeral, her shoulders trembling. When we got home, she remained silent for weeks. No speaking, no eating, no reading, no teaching. I thought it was just a temporary phase of grief. But looking back, I realized Jenna never really recovered. She went back to teaching with a forced smile, started staying up late for no reason, sleeping fitfully during the day, and falling into apathy toward things she used to care about. She became forgetful, missed Liam's parent-teacher meeting. I reminded her. She apologized, and then it was back to the same. Didn't notice those cries for help, or worse, I saw them, but chose to ignore them because I thought I didn't need to fix anything unless the other person spoke up. The pain inside me gradually shifted from anger to a kind of emptiness that was hard to name. I no longer screamed every time I thought of the betrayal, but inside, it felt heavy like a boulder, smoldering like a fever that wouldn't break. The more I understood the factors that led Jenna to such a ruthless act, the more I felt myself slipping into a gray area between right and wrong, good. One evening, while I was packing Liam's clothes, I found a small handkerchief wedged between 2 old books in the drawer. It was Jenna's, with Lauren's name embroidered in the corner. The thread was faded, but the stitching was still delicate, neat. Jenna once told me that whenever she felt lost, she would take that handkerchief out, as if Aunt Lauren was still whispering, reminding her to return to herself. I sat down, holding the handkerchief, thinking about the woman who once read poetry to me in the kitchen, who cried with emotion when Liam said, "I love Mom the most in the world." I wondered, does she still exist, or was she just an illusion I created to soothe myself? I still hadn't opened the hard drive Jenna sent. Part of me was afraid that if I read everything on it, I would have no reason to protect the fragile emotions left between us. But I also knew I couldn't live in this limbo forever. Liam had become more attached to me. My son started asking more about his mom. No longer was it, "When will Mom come back?" but, "Is Mom okay? Does Mom not want to live with me anymore?" I had to figure out how to answer him without lying, but also without turning her into a monster. I didn't know if I could forgive. If Jenna had ever been a victim of a chain of psychological trauma I hadn't recognized, then I was a victim too, of my own silence, of the trust betrayed, and of a love that wasn't cared for properly. Maybe we were both wrong, but perhaps the worst part wasn't the mistake, but the lack of trust to heal it. The psychologist at Houston Mind Care was the first one to use that word with me. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I laughed during the first session, thinking it was something for soldiers returning from the battlefield. But then, when he patiently listened to me talk about my blind rage, about my sleepless nights, about how I couldn't stop watching the video like an addict, I stopped laughing. It turns out, the pain caused by a loved one can destroy your spirit just as much as bombs and bullets. The official diagnosis from the psychiatric hospital where Jenna was being treated came a week later. Chronic clinical depression combined with mixed bipolar disorder. It sounded like a sentence, but what struck me wasn't the diagnosis. It was the accompanying statement. It may have developed 3 years ago, but wasn't detected in time. I walked out of the hospital that day feeling like I had contributed to killing a version of Jenna. A version who could listen, who was sensitive to the feelings of others, who knew when to stop before making a mistake. I hadn't told anyone, not even Walter or Liam. There are some feelings you can't share, not because they're too painful, but because others won't understand unless they've stood at the edge themselves. I only told a small part to Cal, the boxing coach at the training center. He silently handed me a new pair of gloves, then pulled me onto the mat like he always did when he knew I needed to talk without saying a word. "Focus on your hands first," he said. "Don't think too much, just punch." I nodded. For the next hour, I let the sweat speak for me. The feeling of each punch landing on the bag, my breath growing heavier with each blow, was a therapy I never thought I needed. What surprised me was that Liam started sitting with me every time I trained. At first, he just stood outside watching, then gradually asked, "Dad, can I try?" I bought him a pair of small blue gloves. That evening, he held my hand in the car on the way home and said something that almost made me cry. "I feel safe hitting the bag, not because I'm angry, but because I feel like I can be strong." We focused on training from that point. Not much, just 15 minutes each session. But with every punch thrown, the distance between me and my son shrank. No need for many words, just knowing we weren't alone was enough. One Friday afternoon, Walter sent me a copy of Mark's background check, the man who had destroyed my marriage. It clearly stated 2 divorce lawsuits pending in 2 different states, both citing long-term infidelity with multiple partners. Not only had he betrayed his wife, but he had also flirted with at least 3 women at the same workplace over the past year. I read through it quietly, then folded it up and put it in a drawer. Strangely, I didn't feel as angry as I thought I would. Perhaps because, among all the people involved, Mark was the one I cared about the least. That same week, I decided to permanently delete the video that had haunted me for months. Before pressing delete permanently, I watched it one last time. Not to relive the pain, but to face it, one final time. Like how someone would say goodbye to a part of their past that's already dead. I saw myself in it. Eyes wide, hands covered in blood, smashing everything I once cherished. I didn't want to be that man anymore. No matter what Jenna did, no matter how love had shattered, I still wanted to keep a part of myself intact for Liam, so that my son could believe his father was someone worth looking up to. I didn't know what the future would hold. Jenna was still undergoing treatment and couldn't be contacted by anyone except her mother. I hadn't decided on divorce yet, but I knew I would no longer let the past control me. Liam started sleeping better. He no longer woke up in the middle of the night, no longer asked questions that tore my heart apart. He just wanted a family, with someone to listen to him, a safe place to grow up. Maybe I couldn't save this marriage, but I could save my son from the scars of what I couldn't control, and that to me was a victory. I sat next to Liam, watching him sit snugly in my lap, his small hands resting on mine. A strange sense of peace washed over me. Seeing my son becoming happier, more joyful after those dark months, made me feel the persistent worry about the decision of divorce. Liam started going back to school with brighter smiles, though some nights he'd dream about his mom, crying in his sleep. I never wanted him to witness our divorce, no matter how much pain or betrayal had been involved. I recalled the moments from the past when Jenna and I took Liam to the park, sitting together watching him play under the sun. We had happy moments, once believing we'd be together forever. But now, when I looked into my son's eyes, another question lingered in my mind. Could I divorce without causing even more profound harm to him? For Liam, any decision I made would completely change his life. I couldn't forget the first time my son asked, "Dad, why isn't Mom coming back?" That innocent look felt like a punch to my heart. I couldn't keep living in the fear that my son would lose the feeling of a complete family. I still loved Jenna. Maybe not the passionate love of the past, but the love for the woman who once shared everything with me, who was the mother of my son. I couldn't deny that part of me still felt lonely, thinking about losing her completely. But the betrayal, the dishonesty, the broken trust had made it impossible for me to continue living in a relationship without trust. How could I go back to someone who had hurt me this much? But it wasn't because I no longer loved Jenna that I hesitated. I didn't want to become the one controlling her life, forcing her to change according to my wishes, just so I could continue living in a false relationship. Every time I thought about making Jenna prove her feelings, I felt like a failure, someone who couldn't forgive himself, let alone forgive her. I had reached a crossroads with no clear way out. Love can heal all wounds, but could I believe that our love would be strong enough to heal everything? Could I ever trust Jenna again when I couldn't be sure about what she'd done in the past? Could a shared life still bring happiness to both of us when the past always looms in my mind like a ghost? If we decided to continue, Jenna and I would have to fully commit. We both needed to face each other and the past, working together to rebuild a real relationship, not through empty promises or fake meetings. We needed long-term therapy, real conversations with no secrets, no lies. I thought about meeting Jenna again, maybe for the last time, maybe the only time. I could listen to her explain again, to see if she truly wanted to change, or if she was just looking for a way to escape responsibility. Could she really change, or were her words just empty to regain what she had lost? That entire night I lay awake in bed, my mind filled with unanswered questions. I couldn't even imagine what life would be like after the divorce, but one thing I knew for certain was that I would never abandon Liam. No matter what decision I made, I would still be the best father I could be for him. As for Jenna, I didn't know. Love might overcome everything, but would it be enough for me to forgive her? To rebuild a relationship from this rubble? Luke's story is a journey to find healing after deep wounds. He faces psychological shocks and betrayal, but also realizes that while love still exists, trust no longer does. Despite facing the difficult choice between forgiveness and divorce, he prioritizes his son Liam's safety and happiness. Through all the suffering, Luke learns that in every decision, love and honesty must go hand in hand with genuine commitment, or the relationship will not survive. What do you think about Luke's decision? Should he continue to forgive Jenna, or walk away to protect his son? Share your thoughts and don't forget to follow the channel for more touching stories about family life.